After 23 years, we now have a sequel to the original Chicken Run, being Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget, which released on the 15th of December on Netflix. This was originally announced alongside the upcoming Wallace Gromit film, and there's actually a possible tie into that if you're a fan of Wallace Gromit, as a certain character might make a cameo at the end of the movie. So to start off, lots of people have been asking if I can cover the new Chicken Run stuff. But at the time I kind of felt ill-equipped to, because I hadn't seen the original Chicken Run since I was, maybe 4 years old, so I didn't even have a full memory of it. This film came out in 2000, just before I was born. So I remember The Curse of the Were-Rabbit much more clearly, because that was 2005. But yeah, that's the general idea. So going into the sequel, I wanted to watch it as a double bill. So what we did is, me and my brother put on Chicken Run and Dawn of the Nugget back to back, so that he could see them for the first time, and it was quite similar for me because I could barely remember the original film. It kind of made us think, why haven't I watched this in so long? It's got that Aardman charm that I'm not sure you can quite pin down. Very similar to Wallace and Gromit, obviously. Everything you see is recognisable. The character design, the score's brilliant. You know, most of them are British and Northern, which is that typical Aardman sort of thing. And something I appreciated as an adult is the sort of darkness of Chicken Run. Like, it's not really dark and gritty, but from a cinematography standpoint, it is shot a lot in the dark, and it is violent. Like, we hear a chicken beheaded with an axe, just sort of off camera and suggested. But yeah, that actually happened, which is, impactful. That adds stakes to the story. And no one ever feels quite safe, despite it being very comedy based. And the humour and comedy is once again just so grounded, realistic and relatable. And the parallels to World War II, with the chickens being in what are basically like camps and then taken off to be killed and not knowing what's going to happen to them, the innocence of some of the chickens. The comedic characters don't know what's going on, and then it's up to Ginger who actually figures it out. All of that stuff was very relatable if you've ever been in the workforce with people just doing the same thing over and over again, and then you stop and think, wait, this isn't right, So yeah, I absolutely loved Chicken Run. It's one of those things where you think, yeah, this is why I love Aardman, So then we jumped straight from that to Dawn of the Nugget, and before we went into it, I was aware of this controversy online surrounding the voice actors, as unfortunately the main two leading cast members, being Julia Sawalha and Mel Gibson, were not asked back to be in the film. Now I do want to quickly go over this. So a chunk of the cast, supporting characters and stuff, are actors reprising the roles from the first film. But then there's another few odd instances, including the two main characters, where they have been recast despite being fine and well and still acting. Julia Sawalha, who led the last film as Ginger, apparently received an email informing her that she wouldn't be in the film due to sounding too old. So in response to this, she recorded herself doing lines from the first film to demonstrate that she sounded the same, which she does. But nothing was changed following this. And similarly, Rocky isn't voiced by Mel Gibson. The two rats have different voice actors, which to me is a massive shame whichever way you look at it. I've seen directors' comments on this where he basically says it was a creative decision. I think with something like this, a lot of it is built on that nostalgia around the original film, right? You've got set pieces which are recreated so faithfully, and you want it to feel as much like that original film as possible. And the new voices aren't bad and don't distract from the film. I think, it works fine, but it's really odd. Usually with a film like this, you see companies trying really hard to get the original voice actors back, if they're even still with us, And it's like, not only is she still with us, but she's actively emailing Aardman auditions, and she's still being recast. Not only is that one of her biggest roles, that must be devastating to have that happen, but it's one of Aardman's biggest characters, really. You've got Wallace and Gromit and Shaun the Sheep, but the original Chicken Run movie, in which, she stars as Ginger, grossed higher than The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. This was a huge film and a huge character. So yeah, I don't want to go any further into that. All I'm going to say is, it's a shame. and I think it would have elevated the experience of watching the movie for me personally to hear them again. But even considering these changes, I've found the transition of watching the movies back to back incredibly smooth, as the first film finishes up with them being safe on this island, and then we find them there at the beginning of Dawn of the Nugget. I think the animation is arguably smoother and more fluent, though of course you never want to stray too far from the original kind of handmade, thrown together look of it, which is still there. It's great that you have all the original characters with quite prominent roles. You know, they haven't gotten rid of any characters or thrown in random new ones for no reason. This is the original cast of chickens for the most part from the first film. So the main plot of the film is that Rocky and Ginger, the main protagonists, have a child called Molly. And Molly feels sort of imprisoned on the island that ironically was their freedom in the original film. And this concerns Ginger because that's how she felt originally. And it's very similar to the plot of The Lion King 2, that's what it reminds us of. The two protagonists of the main film grow up and have a baby girl, ironically. So she then intentionally goes exploring, where she bumps into a friend that leads them into danger inadvertently. And then the parents have to go and rescue them and get tangled in the plot. Yeah, it's reminders of that. And when the film opens, you get some of the original score, and I believe it's one of the guys that worked on the original score who returned for this, so that's always nice when you get the themes and motifs and stuff. The visuals, I think, quite contrary to the first film, a really bright, fun, colourful movie. I think there are a few good comedy moments in this, but as a whole, I think it's sort of more oversaturated than the first one. You know, like loads of the lines are puns and jokes and stuff. A lot of them fall flat or don't have much of an effect, but some of them are really funny. So I do prefer the jokes and writing style of the first film. This one feels a bit more modern, and I think it would have benefited from just cutting down on the jokes a bit, because they're not as effective when they're being thrown at you a lot, you know. So Rocky and Ginger and the others go on this sort of Mission Impossible style, like a rescue mission to rescue Molly, and the original villain returns from the first film, being Mrs. Tweedy, and that was all really cool. It kind of ended up feeling like a Star Wars or something by the end. You know, the levels of like, oh my god, it's this character who knows that character, because they all have this established history, you know? That's why I think it worked really well as a sequel. And again, anything that was familiar, like you had Rocky's old poster from the first film, where he was supposedly a flying rooster and all this, but the props look like the same. Bearing in mind the originals were mostly destroyed in the Aardman fire, so props to the team for just perfectly replicating those models. They look, you know, visually just right. I watched the behind the scenes as well, and my god, it's, you know, every time you see that stuff, it never stops being impressive. Just to see all of the models and the size of them, the scale of everything, all the different versions and the time involved. I think 6 years this was in production, which is all mind blown, and I have to say it has paid off. You know, when I started hearing about it with all the cast and stuff, you often think, that's not a good sign if it's not, you know, the same cast leading it, right? But rest assured, it's Aardman, and they've brought that magic back to it. They've done a really good job. I think the film feels slightly more fast-paced. Like when you compare it back to back with the first film, I think that one's a lot slower and calculated, which can work really well. I think there's probably more exciting stuff going on that'll grip kids these days, but bearing that in mind, it keeps the identity of the first film. It doesn't chuck that away in favour of modern stuff. It's very true to the original on this sort of larger scale that doesn't, for example, make everything CGI, but it might incorporate CGI to help the stop motion puppets, which is seamless. You know, you can't tell which is the way it should be. Off the top of my head, Mrs. Tweedy's entrance, where she dramatically walks down the stairs, but it's a spiral staircase, so when she's just about to come into frame, the camera cuts and you don't see her for about 20 minutes until she finally gets to the bottom. That was really good, just sort of like daft comedy. The Mrs. Tweedy character as well, she's played by the original actress, and that character is so evil and so dislikable, and they maintain that for this film. A bit of a spoiler here, but there was a part at the end where you're like, oh, she has like a pretty brutal death, but then she's seen alive afterwards. And I thought it was kind of a shame because it was such a good scene. You got this really evil character who has killed other characters multiple times. And it gets to a point where you kind of think, yeah, she could possibly deserve that, like Paella in Wallace and Gromit. Sometimes these characters don't make it, and it's probably for the best. But, you know, I suppose they're keeping her around in case they do any more. Another bit of a spoiler, but as I mentioned, we saw a chicken killed in the first film. Right, and one of my thoughts was, like, God, they'd never do that now. But they do, they kill another chicken, and it's arguably, I don't know, arguably worse. The chickens are all sort of brainwashed into being happy as they die, which apparently makes good chicken. It's a really fun idea for the film, but it's really like a dark thing, you know? They're happily going to the death, and you just hear, like, processing, I believe they call it. There's no screams or anything, but you just hear that. And then a steaming hot bucket of like KFC comes out in front of the villain, who then, you know, the guy consumes some of it. And it's like, my God, we've seen this chicken alive 2 seconds ago. Yeah, so it's not afraid to go there, which is nice. Again, it's almost a shock value of, oh, is this cute, charming Aardman movie, and oh, death. It's the equivalent of Feathers McGraw pulling out a gun on Gromit. That's a good comparison. It's sort of daft and stupid, but you still go like, whoa. But yeah, the new voice cast fit in really well, like, you know, new characters and stuff. There was particularly the Scouser chicken that stood out. That was hilarious because you don't often, it's only through Aardman you'd have such a character. You know, when you get these obscure northern accents and stuff, it's really funny to see and hear them in a big film like this, is you just wouldn't anywhere else. And I think it adds to the realism of the comedy because it's just relatable. But you've probably been waiting for the Wallace and Gromit character, which I only saw this because there was an interview with the director, I believe, and he revealed that there's a Wallace and Gromit character in, it's like pretty much the last frame, the last few frames. And I'd watched this with my brother like just and then pulled it up and I was like, no way. So what happens is, bit more spoilers. At the end, when the chickens have rescued the other captive chickens, they sort of vouch to go around and rescue as many chickens as they can from all of these death camps, basically. So you see a bit of a montage, and then at the end, all of the chickens pop up that they've rescued, like this wide variety of different chickens, right? One of them is just Feathers McGraw. Like, you've got all these distinctively, you know, the chicken run art style of chicken. At the back is straight up Feathers McGraw with the red glove on, dressed as a chicken. So he pops up in the background and then sort of slyly slips back down. Whether that's hinting at like a return in the next Wallace and Gromit film, I don't know. It's interesting as a whole because you could dive into that and say, oh my God, Feathers McGraw is canon in Chicken Run. That means Chicken Run and Wallace and Gromit take place in the same universe. I mean, they might, but at the same time, it could also just be a fun cameo, which, you know, it works as that. So thinking about the lore of this, I wonder, what if Feathers McGraw escaped prison or the zoo? And what if he started committing crimes again dressed as the chicken? But then he was taken captive as a chicken. And then he was busted out of one of these farms or whatever by the Chicken Run characters and has joined this sort of rebel force of chickens. Yeah, that's the deep side of it. You can look into it like that, or it's a fun cameo. I think it works either way, to be honest. It's exciting to see a Wallace and Gromit character on screen. Like, that is the first appearance of the character since The Wrong Trousers, right? You know, that's a pretty big deal. But yeah, after seeing that, watching both of the films back to back, and then entering 2024 where we're getting a new Wallace and Gromit film, you know, really good vibes from Aardman. They're kind of on a roll, and I'm just really looking forward to the future stuff. The original Chicken Run is so good, and probably my favourite of the two. I think that film is so fundamentally simple, but its execution is so, like, precise, and it delivers on this sort of quite dark, scary, but, you know, still a kid's movie at the end of the day, with all this British humour, and for the most part, the sequel captures a lot of this stuff. The beginning of the film, I think the director said, was intentionally very similar to the first Chicken Run before it evolves somewhat, and I like that. I think it works. It becomes more grand in scope, perhaps, you know, doing things that the original could not have done. You know, you've got a really good voice cast, just the best animation possible, and I love that they're still doing this. And you've got companies like Netflix and that funding this stuff. In a world where everything is CGI, There's something really charming and endearing about that. So on the whole, I really enjoyed this film. If you're going to watch it, it's on Netflix. I would recommend watching the original first because it works really well as a double bill. I think loads of people who maybe hadn't seen other Aardman stuff have seen this film because it was so big at the time, and if like me you haven't seen the original in ages, it's really worth a watch. If I were to rank them, I think the original sort of sets the bar. I'd probably rate it about a 9 out of 10, pretty solid, really good film. And the sequel, it may be a 7, 7 or 8 kind of thing. So yeah, that is my thoughts on the Chicken Run films. And as hinted at by Feathers McGraw at the end of the movie, this is now the road to Wallace and Gromit in 2024. I couldn't be more excited really after seeing this. It's really bumped up, my enthusiasm and confidence in Aardman. As so many companies have just changed who they are over the years, right? Whereas Aardman very much have the same values, and I think that's to do with a lot of the original people being there still, while introducing new talent. These days, Aardman are a rare example of a company you can go, like, that company makes good films. If you watch an Aardman film, you kind of know what you're getting, and I love that. So please leave your thoughts down below if you've seen the film, and I'll see you next time for plenty more Aardman content.